Hello, everyone. I am Ousmane Power-Greene, and I am the author of The Confessions of Matthew Strong, which is a novel that follows Allie Douglas, who's a Black philosopher who teaches in a university and finds herself ensnared in the world of a white supremacist named Matthew Strong. And so the novel follows her journey to try to unravel the mystery surrounding some missing women in Alabama. It's a thrilling ride, and hopefully one that those that have a chance to read it will find enjoyable and also thought-provoking.
Well, we are excited to hear about it. So welcome, Mystery and Thriller Ravens. I'm your on-air host, Sarah DeVello, and I'm so excited to welcome Professor Ousmane Power-Greene live tonight to give us the inside scoop on his brand new book, The Confessions of Matthew Strong, out October 25th. Now, we are here to get the inside scoop on the book that everyone is talking about, and I can't wait to get into all the delicious details. Now, if you're new here, welcome. We're so happy to have you. Here's how it goes. So every Monday for hashtag Mystery Monday, because Mondays can be murder, I give you my handpicked featured authors and you get to ask them anything. So ask Professor Power-Greene about his writing process, how long it took, the book, his relation to his characters. Is he write by day, write by night? He's also a professor. We need all the scoop. We need the whole skinny. And I can't wait to get to all of the amazing blurbs. Alicia, welcome to the conversation, saying hello, Sarah, and Professor Ousmane Power-Greene. Margaret Pinard, welcome to the conversation. She was kicking off with a question she'd like to know, was your novel influenced by reading Kindred? Such great themes.
That's a great question. I'm trying to figure out what Black author who writes in African religion is not influenced by Kindred. But no, it's a great question. I mean, a lot of the ideas of movement and time actually is something that I always admired in Kindred. I don't have the same supernatural element as Kindred, but I certainly am curious about the effects that the past has on African-American people today. And, obviously in that novel, you have a literal experience of sort of going backwards in time where, in my novel, it's much more theoretical and it's much more a part of an effort on the part of my villain, Matthew Strong, to recapture what he thinks is lost in the past. So it's a great question.
Ooh, so let's dive a little deeper. You said that the book Kindred influenced you were interested in the movement. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the movement. Do you mean the movement of the characters through time? Let's talk a little more about that. Let's dive deeper.
Yeah, so the idea of the ways in which the past haunts individuals, particularly African Americans, there is a sense of backward facing, forward facing, right? So, while one is thinking about their own life now and they're thinking about sort of the ways in which ancestors, the past influences decisions they make. Now we're into biology these days, although it's not as a major part of my novel, but we're interested in thinking about all those intergenerational links. And so, for me, my character, Allie Douglas, is at once constantly interested in ideas that animated people in the past. And so in that sense, more theoretical than what's beautiful about Kindred is there's literal movement. You're capable of actually transporting yourself back in time, whether you do it willingly or not. So those are some of the ways I mean it.
Ooh, now in your day job, you are a professor.
Yep.
And you wrote about the Harlem Renaissance revisited, mm-hmm. politics, art, and letters. So literally studying how history has impacted us, how the Harlem Renaissance has affected us today. Let's talk a little more about that, because that's such a rich time for everyone, but especially for Black writers.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely consider myself influenced and shaped by the tradition of the era. I mean, part of what my work attempts to do is to look at art and politics, right? So oftentimes those who are on here who took a course, if you took an English class, for example, and you're sort of like, studying the Harlem Renaissance era, it tends to be like a Langston Hughes poem or maybe read Zora Neale Hurston, but very rarely do we get into their politics, right? So we don't get into Langston Hughes' politics, his radical politics, actually. we don't get into that. Instead, it's sort of like abstracted. So most of my work has been interested in the ways in which Black writers and artists also functioned as cultural workers, right? So in other words, helping other poets get access, using the Socialist Party, for example, to get access to the types of people that would fund their work. And so all of this plays into my thinking about, in the novel, not so much specifically, but more the sort of greater tradition of sort of Black writers and artists, as well as activists, intellectuals. So,
Margaret saying, yes, my friend Bree of Locked Booktition just had a great video about what is HAR for Black Indigenous people of color and how it's different and how you can't gatekeep the definitions for the genre. This is part 1 of 2. She would like to know, does this have horror elements for you?
Absolutely, 100%. Like some people on here, I am a huge fan of horror. I'm a huge fan of Gothic works. I've been always drawn to fear. It's something that has been a sort of important part of my life growing up, and so this novel really taps into that great question, right? The question that ultimately many people face, particularly Black Americans, about the ways in which the past, particularly organized white supremacist movements, lynching, these sorts of things, have functioned around a narrative that, in my case, in my work, my characters attempt to confront, right? And so there are those who are aware of elements of Gothic literature, elements of sort of traditions of horror, will see nearly all the telltale signs. Just like, wait a second, I see this, I see that. So very much influenced by all that, but it doesn't get in the way with the front part of it. I sort of wrote this book to move pace-wise, right? So it has a pace that's it's a little bit different, a lot different than sort of any sort of Gothic or horror works, which tend to be in place, right? So it's a house, or it's it's a space or a piece of land, or I have that element in there, but at the same time, there's a mystery element in terms of who done it and how did it happen. And so genre bending, certainly. My interests are broad, and what I care most about are people being engaged in the work and enjoying it, and also learning something from it, perhaps.
Fabulous. Now, for those of us who are less educated, myself included, who don't know, what is Gothic? What is horror? What when you say you'll see the familiar elements, Develop doesn't know what that is. What are the familiar elements of Gothic?
All right. So the easily the most famous is Dracula. And so you think about Bram Stoker, right? What's Bram Stoker trying to do? People think it's, at the time, it's not a literary novel, the late 19th century. They see it as sort of a trash, the pre-pulp. But there's elements in there that you'll see show up frequently, whether it's, from, ghosts, hauntings, to apparitions at nighttime, to the ability to move in time and space, graveyards, sort of, those are some of the primary elements, right? You have, and then of course Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven, 19th century stuff. If you think about, those are, one of the more influential ones, which can get controversial, we'll talk about it, but is H.L. Lovecraft. Lovecraft, those who watch Lovecraft Country or have read the great novel about, sort of that inspired it, you see those elements that are in his, Lovecraft's work in contemporary horror, right? And so, again, some sort of mystery, intergenerational stuff that happens, but mostly the idea of a person living somehow, outside of what we know is possible. Now, because my novel isn't squarely a horror novel, no one does that. Instead, it's much more about how we think about the haunting of the past and the ways in which spaces you go into feel very eerie. In fact, I will tell you one story, Sarah. I actually saw a friend of mine. Our kids play sports together. We were at the field, and so I sent her the novel, maybe a year ago, and I was like, trying to get her feedback. She's also a Black female scholar, PhD, whole thing. And when she initially said to me, she sent me back feedback. Oh, I really liked it. It was good. I don't really have a lot of really critical feedback. But then she just told me today. She said, actually, I got to totally admit something. The novel was so scary, I actually couldn't finish it. which I was actually like, okay, wow, all right, right, so that was the first person that said that, everybody, though, so I do think that you all be able to finish it, but it's very interesting to think that if I effectively made a person afraid, right, like, wow, that's artistically something that, one strives to do when you're dealing with the themes and topics of my book. So that's a true story from I guess it was yesterday.
She subtly pulls her kid away from your kid on the field. She's like, "Don't play with that kid. You're not going to Ousmane's house. That's not going to happen." Yep. Oh my gosh, Melissa Watson joining us live from Australia. She says, "This sounds so fascinating." I should be doing this with an Australian accent. "This sounds so fascinating. I don't know much about this time." She says, "Also, hello, Melissa. Welcome to the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us." And this is, that's what I love about different books, when you get to really immerse yourself in these different times, and you're reading along, and you're there for the whodunit, and you're there for the mystery, but you're also learning and exploring and just soaking it all in. Margaret saying, "This sounds so good. I'm going to go put on the Storygraph shelf for this month's Black Aweenathon readathon." Hell yes, Margaret. Thank you. She's adding, "I might be able to weather the horror scare if I hang onto the historical elements." I know, I'm kind of a wuss. She's saying, "Okay, maybe not if your book scared your first reader over there." Absolutely. Now, Ousmane, you're racking up all the praise. So let's look at some of the praise. Let's kick off here with Paul Beatty's. I'm going to pull up his right here. And he is saying, "The grandeur of the Harlem Renaissance beautifully backgrounds the Confessions of Matthew Strong, fitting because, like Rudolph Fisher and Zora Neale Hurston, Power-Greene knows from Slave Shackled to News to the Nightly News, the Black experience in America has been a perpetual crime story. This moving and exceedingly sharp thriller shreds the pretense that America's murderous history is not a whodunit, but a we-done it." So let's dive in a little deeper. So first of all, what do you think is the key to writing both a moving and exceedingly sharp book? Because those are, I feel like to write a moving book, you almost have to slow the pace down to really get in there in a deep way. But to write a sharp book that, like you said, keeps the pace going, you got to move it along. So let us in on how you did that.
Yeah, I mean, so the craft elements. Well, first of all, let me just say, editing, having a great editor. Look, let's be honest, right? I mean, it's like, a lot of the ideas we have, as writers, and I know many people who are on here are writers themselves, having professional readers, right, what editors are, really help you making decisions, particularly around pace, right? So the moment you sort of decide that you really, you make the decision that pace becomes important, then you got to go back to some of the craft elements and say, all right, I really blown out this section of the book. So let's say, Allie Douglas in the woods, right? So for me, what's important is tapping into those Gothic themes and, the earlier Southern landscape. And, there are elements of that slow a pace down because you're really trying to immerse people in that. And so, but if you want to keep it moving, then of course, it's necessary that you say, all right, well, some of these may need to go because, those that are following on the story really want to find out, whether or not she's going to get to her destination or what's going to happen. So that's sort of an example. So for me, it was a lot of revisions, but also having to let go of some of the, the aspects of description and sort of the aspects of what's happening need to be, edited out and pulled down a bit if we're going to keep the pace going.
Fair enough. And I know I can get bogged down in that delicious exposition kind of writing where I love beautiful writing and I love beautiful prose and I love to immerse myself in that scenery. So I take your point and I respect it. So thank you for letting us into your process. Let's talk a little bit more about your process. So are first of all, how long did it take you to write the book? Soup to nuts, A to Z.
Yeah. So I first put pen to the page July 15th, 2007. Wow. And I can tell you that, and I don't have it with me. I didn't bring it, but I have the notebook to show, right? So my process is handwriting. I got to handwrite my first drafts, right? And so I sit down, the ideas come to me, and I begin to sketch out ideas, brainstorm, and just write. I let the sort of dialogue go, and I just hear the voices, and I just let it go, and I just write the story as best I can. Of course, once you finish all that, or you sort of decide that you have a lot, right? Notebooks are filling up. There becomes, you begin to have to start making, decisions around directions. But also for me, I'm just following. That first draft is about getting it down on paper, writing, and then when I go from typing, from sort of handwriting to typing, that process, you do some editing, do some moving, right? Because you could just type everything. I've done that before, but oftentimes there's a process of selection, this process of what's happening in the work to get to the type of written draft. And that's going to be something that's going to begin to look closer to where I go with it. So it was a long journey, but in the meantime, I've been doing a lot of writing, right? And so, maybe like some other first-time authors, I'm a sort of a late bloomer first-time author because I write nonfiction, right? I write history books, articles. And so for me, the fiction side of things, I am like every other first-time author, even though I've written a book, history book, and I've written a lot of articles and edited collections and things. So, so for me, the process of writing fiction has been one that has been a lot longer for this particular project. And that's the reason I'm so happy that people besides my small group will have a chance to experience the work. You know what I mean? Because they've been hearing about it forever. Many of them haven't actually got a chance to read it. So, there's those you've been talking about. Say, when's this book going to come out? It's like, it's been on this book forever. My daughter's 15, so I can definitively say that she was born October that year, right? So I count my novels in children.
So she's in high school. Yep. You're wondering when this is gonna happen. Okay, I'm seeing this. Wow. Right. Okay, so your first foray into fiction, but meanwhile you're writing nonfiction books. You're a professor. Mm-hmm. So how was that for you to transition from nonfiction academic writing over here to not just fiction, but a mystery? Yeah.
So for me, I tell people that writing historical work or academic work, particularly historical work, and writing fiction are like the opposite. It's like the opposite process, right? One process, right, when you're writing historical work, someone's giving you a bunch of boxes and like, here's for my grandmother, my great-grandmother, right? Like she kept all this stuff, and the historian has to sit down with those boxes and go through them and then take from them and what their knowledge is of the time period and create narrative. Right, the narrative that somebody else wants to actually read to make sense of all these boxes. People don't want to go through 20 boxes, or you know what I mean. Like they want to know, like, well, what's important, right? So that's what historical writing is, right? When I'm writing fiction, it's the opposite, right? Inside my mind, I'm sleeping, I'm thinking. I have these sort of like what we think about as like sort of like blurry, dreamlike ideas. I hear voices. I have narrative. And for me, it's an internal process of discovery. Like, what exactly is happening? Like, literally, like, what's happening in my mind? But
for 15 years, you've been having these dreams and hearing these voices.
But not consistently. It's just when again, when I return to the work, right? So when I return to the work, I sit down and I start working on writing. I'm re-entered into that process, right? So it's not sort of like straight through. It's like I re-entered the process of trying to figure out. And yeah, I have been blessed and fortunate for it to come back, in terms of the ideas and the voices and the images. And so that process, has continued. And, and also I should say that, this novel by and large was complete in 2017, maybe-ish.
Okay, so only 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so the last, 5 years have been a process of finding an agent, finding editors, revising. And that process can be sometimes a less fun process because you sort of have the manuscript and you're like, ready to go. And, I'm fortunate to have a great agent who's was an editor first in her career. And so that first process was really her loving the book but also saying like, hey, here are some ways I think they'll enhance it. And, working back and forth. She's working on other projects. I'm working on other projects as we're trying to get this piece into a format that we could send out to publishers. So yeah, that's another part of sort of the process and sort of the difference between all of that. So
okay, cool. Ousmane, I want to make sure that we are getting some of these amazing questions I'm seeing. So first, let's pause. Let's talk a little more about this fiction, nonfiction. Margaret's wondering, what are the major differences you found when it comes to publishing fiction versus nonfiction? Great question,
yes,
Mark.
that's a really good question. So the publishing process for nonfiction, and I should say more academic nonfiction, right? So when you're working with publishers and academic presses, so I went with NYU Press for my first book. You're submitting a manuscript to an editor who's an expert in the sort of sub area, right? So they're reading books in that sub area, and then based on their views about the book, they're going to send it out to what we call blind reviewers, right? So these are other scholars who are senior scholars who are going to give the editor and the press feedback about the quality of the work, right? And so you get those review letters, and then you have a conversation with the editor about this manuscript, this unpublished piece. And in that are changes and things that need to be developed, sections that maybe have already been gone over by other people. And so that process between editor and scholar, and then you resubmit it back to them. They send it back to the outside reviewers. They either say, yes, we really love the revisions, and the press goes on and gives you a contract, you publish it. When you're publishing in the fiction side, or at least in my case, my experience, because I chose to try to find an agent, that's the first step, right? So if you're, I was able to find an agent, and then that becomes who's an expert. And because she was a publisher, or she was an editor as well, she's in New York City, she knows publishers, she's been in that world. And so it was a process of getting that manuscript to a point where she really believed that editors would want to buy the novel, right? And so once we did that, then we sent it out. It was COVID. So the publishing industry was shut down. Right. Not a great time to attempt to sell your baby you've been working on for a decade plus. Right. But I was fortunate to get a lot of great reads. And then finally, I was fortunate enough to be in a situation where I'd have an incredible publisher who's passionate about the project and really believed in it to take it on. And then, of course, after that comes the process of working with another editor and getting it in shape. So hope that helps and clarifies the process.
Thank you so much for the question, Margaret. Thank you for the answer, Ousmane. Leisha would like to know, which of your characters was the hardest to write and why? Great question, Leisha.
That is actually a great question. So those who don't know, my protagonist is a Black woman. And so I am not a Black woman. And so the challenges of attempting to write that were extreme. Wow. Though I'm not a white supremacist from the South. So then again, writing that character was very challenging. Which was more challenging. I don't know. They were both really challenging. For a variety of reasons.
Let's talk about the reasons. So let's first talk about Allie. Mm-hmm. Why and how was it hard for you to write a Black woman? And what was your process? Did you share it with a small circle of Black female readers, and what was their feedback? Were they like, you do not get me at all, or were they like, you get me?
So I am fortunate that my mother is a Black woman from the South. So my first read, I'm a mama's boy, everybody. So, my early readers were at the kitchen table correcting things about the South. So I'm fortunate in that regard. But seriously, in all honesty, I mean, I am a person who very much I teach and write in the tradition of Black women writers and memoirs. And so a lot of my process was really thinking critically about cadence, structure, sentence structure, thinking about the South, thinking about types of things that will be said, will be used, all things that, of course, I'm terrified, and I'm sure I got things wrong. The readers will determine. You don't get to defend your work, unlike scholarly work or other work. Whether or not it's convincing or not will be for the reader. But my process was really, immersing myself in the tradition. Of course, friends. But it's not so. Some of us have great circles of readers, and I have very, very busy friends, and my Black intellectual female women are very, very busy, and it's not always easy to get a lot of feedback from people. And so So that was sort of my process and how I thought about the work and I absolutely did have some of my Black women friends read it and give me great feedback. Hey, this isn't realistic. That's not. And so that has been an essential part of the idea of the lone writer, y'all. I mean, it's just such a romantic notion. We have hopefully we have community, we have a team, we have family who are going to be honest with us and tell us what sort of works, what doesn't. And so for me, it's about humility, and it's about sharing parts, mostly listening to people and recognizing what's sort of effective, what's not. So that's sort of my process. But both are very difficult to write. In terms of white supremacists, in some ways, I will say that my original efforts, and I think this is important. The structure of this novel is very different for a long time, and so I wrote my antagonist, my villain, Matthew Strong. I wrote my early draft in first person, so I was using sort of his voice, and so I was writing from his sort of vantage point. A lot of that had come from a lot of research I had done, that I've been doing for a long time about white power organizing, and reading stuff that I'm not even going to say its name, these different works, because I don't want people, them to run out and start reading them. But let's just say that, the tradition is not hard to find, the works aren't hard to find, and it's an important part of the research process. There's not a lot of originality, honestly, a lot of the writings, and so, some of that is just the reality of the rhetoric. But one must immerse themselves for their characters. But because I ultimately chose, which is I think a good decision, to have Allie Douglas tell the story, we don't get the complete dimensionality of Matthew Strong that we would might get if we had two first persons, have sort of, which is originally how it was written, or even if it was an omniscient third person, right, or even a third person narrator, which we'd be able to do that more. So the limitation craft wise of first person is that you're in this case, my villain is only really understood through the eyes of Allie Douglas. So Matthew Strong's only really understood in terms of his depth through Allie's eyes, right? Because I chose to go with first person. So I hope that answers the question, and it also helps you realize why it's so hard to say what was the hardest to write. They're both very challenging, and I guess like I said, the success of the work is you all when you read it. If I succeed or didn't, it'll be determined by the readers.
Leecha, thank you for the wonderful question. Ousmane, thank you for the juicy answer. We have a mystery who's saying, always go to mom. Yes, and I appreciated your confession that you are a mama's boy for Team Mom here. Margaret saying, yes, I was going to say you must have had some tensions with those character voices in your head. Yeah, absolutely. Leecha, thanking you for answering her questions. Leecha, thank you for asking your questions. Ousmane, I really appreciate how you say the lone writer as successful as the lone writer, exactly. Talking about the fallacy of that, because I think we do still have this idea of the solo writer sitting there, typing his way through the day, maybe day drinking, I don't know, like just clawing his way through a desert of words. I think that was one of the things that surprised me the most, is that it really does take a village to get that book into the world, to midwife that book into the world. We're just saying that did answer her questions. Thank you so very much. Margaret, following up on your answer, saying she's wondered how icky some authors must feel when they write in a true villain's POV, extra showers every day. Yeah, because if you're immersing yourself in this hate-filled, ugly rhetoric and reading it, I mean, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an occupational hazard for being a scholar of Black radical tradition and Black social movement. So I have, for many years, had to just sort of deal with the reality that the content and subject matter is very difficult. I also teach courses. Like right now, I'm teaching a first-year seminar on violence in African American tradition. So we'll be talking about race riots, tomorrow. Or not tomorrow, on Wednesday in class. And so I'm, constantly navigating these very, very difficult themes and topics and trying to, manage the emotional aspects of horrors that are, sadly a part of our reality in this world. And so it's definitely an occupational hazard of mine. So it wasn't, writing this particular character wasn't a deviation for the types of things that I'm reading, in my effort to teach the story of African American social and political movements. It's challenging material. So.
I want to remind you, the book, y'all, the book is not out yet. It is coming out on October 25th. Professor Power-Greene is jumping on today to give us the inside scoop in this very special pre-launch event. So here is the link to pre-order the book. So you can pre-order the book tonight, and the good folks at Murder by the Book will send it out to you on October 25th as soon as the book drops. So pre-order tonight, y'all. I'm going to drop the link in the comments so that no matter where you're watching, because you're going to 6 destinations simultaneously, you can grab it. You can click and order so that you can immerse yourself in the world of Allie Greene and the fabulous Confessions of Matthew Strong. And I also wanted to share, there's so many fabulous reviews, but I want to share another one from Abby Collette, because Abby was on the show earlier this year. And so I want to make sure I get to her because she's so fabulous. Here it is. She said, "This is a piercing, affecting novel about sisters and family, race and power, and the impossibility of choosing to escape an identity or create one. A chilling, suspenseful tale that is both thought-provoking and immersive and will keep readers glued to the page. Highly recommended." Congratulations on that fabulous praise from Abby Collette, USA Today and Wall Street Journal bestselling author. And I see that we are over time, but there's been so much to talk about that it's just been so great. What do you think the key to writing? You know what? I want to get to these. I have some questions too, but I want to make sure I get to our viewers' questions first. So I'm going to hop over. We have our mystery user here. Welcome to the conversation, friend. Saying, since you teach and write about such difficult subject matter, what forms of self-care do you use to keep from being overwhelmed? What a great question.
Yeah. So, in terms of actively, I definitely, when I can, been trying to keep a meditative practice, trying to do yoga, trying to stay, sort of healthy, get the walks in, watch silly movies and try not to spend all your time watching documentaries about racial violence or, so staying sort of, engaged in life outside of either reading or writing, so that's sort of what I do. But the thing is, and this is what I sort of tell my students, is I'm always very inspired by the sorts of people who defy, be it, those who are engaged in social movements, be it defying, inequality and justice. So that actually gives me energy. And I think about my own self, my life, and I'm just like, the people who I write about, had it a lot worse than me and were able to try to keep the tradition going and recognize that, it's bigger than us. And what we're trying to do as educators is to help society understand the ways in which particularly people misuse the past as a mechanism to persuade people ideas that feed, really, really negative and destructive thoughts. And so, for me, I see this as a sort of obligation, as a calling. And when it comes to my creative practice, I'm also very curious about sort of delving into those things. So that's some of the stuff that I do. But that's what I do in a nutshell. I don't want to keep going on.
Margaret said she had the same question. She was like wondering if you have a counteracting spell for getting out of those hard topics: ice cream, jujitsu, poetry. Yeah, I think we're all wondering that. So thank you for sharing that. And it seems like seeing yourself as a link in that story and as this as service and coming from that service oriented perspective, it keeps it from being too debilitatingly sad or hard or overwhelming. So thank you for sharing that. Our mystery friend is saying, thank you so much for answering their question. Thank you for joining us there, friend. Y'all, I want to thank you so much for joining you. I want to remind you this book is not even out yet. So here, once again, is click that link, pre-order tonight. And the good folks at Murder by the Book will send this out to you. Professor Ousmane Power-Greene, thank you so much for joining us, sir, and giving us the inside scoop on the Confessions of Matthew Strong. Thank you for this wonderfully enriching educational talk. We so appreciate you and appreciate your book. So thank you so much. And thank you all for watching.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
We'll see you next week for Mystery Monday, because you know Mondays can be murder.